Hi, it's Lucy, and today I'm here to do my March wrap-up. In the month of March, I read 10 books. I didn't take part in any readathons. I didn't really do anything exciting, except we hit 2,000 subscribers on this channel in March, so thank you so much for that. As usual, I have all the timestamps for every book that I'm talking about listed down below, so if you ever want to skip a book or just know what's coming ahead, you can look in the description, open it, please. And yeah, I think that's it for this introduction. We have a lot of books to talk about, and I apparently have a lot of things to say according to my notes. So let's get into it. So the first book that I read in March was The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemison. You've probably heard of this book, but you probably don't know what it's about because I feel like no one really knows how to explain it, and I am not saying I do, but I'm going to do my best to try. The Fifth Season is a fantasy story that takes place on a world that is much like Earth, except for the fact that periodically the world goes through something called the fifth season, where a geographic event happens and basically the world ends. A lot of people die, and that's kind of how all of society is structured. It's based on trying to survive a season when it comes, and the seasons all come randomly. They don't know what will cause it. Since they are not predictable in any way, society has really formed around that. And also in the society, there are certain people called Orgons who can control the earth, which you would think in a world where there are constantly geographic events that kill a lot of people, these people would be important and highly regarded, and that's not really true. These people are treated as second-class citizens, and they are highly controlled, and most people think of them sort of like the devil, like burning witches at the stake, like that's how they're treated. And people who make it out of like their communities have to go to a place in the middle of the world to be trained and controlled, basically, so that the greater society can use them for their advantage. In this book, we follow three perspectives as the world is on the brink of another season. The first perspective is a woman who ends up coming home to find out that her husband has killed their son and kidnapped their daughter after finding out that their son is an Oregon. Another perspective is about a young girl who's been discovered as an Oregon. And the last perspective is a woman who's grown up in the central point where all the Oregons are forced to train, and she's on another mission for like the government kind of thing. So that's my summary. Hopefully that's helpful. I've been putting off reading this for a while because it's kind of intimidating to me. I don't read a whole lot of high fantasy. I do read like some fantasy stories, but it's mostly YA, which is just more readable in my opinion. And so that was intimidating for me. I've heard a lot of people say they don't really know what's going on, and that was kind of true for half the book, but I did really enjoy it. I gave it 4 stars. I was super enthralled by the story and what was going on. I wanted to know what was happening to the characters that we were following, and the writing made me want to keep going and figure out what was going on in the story, even when I was confused. I will say, if you do decide to read this, there is a glossary in the back. That was super helpful when I figured it out, but it was halfway through the book when I figured it out. Actually, Jesse from Bow Ties and Books like tweeted about the glossary, and I was like, there's a glossary this whole time, and I was very upset. I feel like books should put the glossary in front of the book or something so that people know, because this happens so often if there are books with like extra words or anything. Like sometimes if there's a book with like a foreign language or something, then they put the glossary in the back, which I guess I know where the glossary goes, but I wish they would say something about it, because I would spend the whole book being confused by all these words because I don't know what they mean. And then sometimes you can use like context clues and stuff, but sometimes you like can't, which is why there's a glossary, and I don't realize there's a glossary until I'm literally at the end of the book, and I'm like, well, it's too late now. I already made up meanings for all these words. The story, like I said, takes place in a rich world complete with its own history, and you kind of find out some of the history as the book goes on, which I found super interesting. There's also like another section in the back of the book that has like previous seasons and what happened in them, which I thought was really cool, and like it shows how fleshed out the world is. Definitely the most interesting part, and it made me really want to know more. So when the book ended and there was some stuff that we still didn't know, I was a little disappointed, but I assume that was an authorial choice and that we'll find out in the next 2 books, other stuff that's going on. Also in this book, one of their perspectives was in second person, which I found kind of alarming, or just like it disengaged me from the book a bit, because you're not used to reading in second person really, but luckily I did get used to it rather quickly. Overall, I really like this. This was definitely one of the most interesting books I've ever read, and I'm really looking forward to reading the next one. I have it on hold at my library, so hopefully I'll be reading it at least this year, maybe? We'll see. The Mermaid's voice returns in this one by Amanda Lovelace. I received an e-arc of this on NetGalley in exchange for an honest review. So I gave this 3.5 stars. This is the third in a trilogy of poetry collections, and all the collections are centered around like feminist themes, and this one specifically centers around a sexual assault that the author experienced, so trigger warning for that. But also in the front of the book, there are all the trigger warnings. The author does provide that for you. I like this better than The Witch Doesn't Burn in this one, which I didn't like that much. I gave it 3.5 stars, but I would lower it to a 3, thinking about it and comparing it to the other 2 books in the series. But I liked The Princess Saves Herself in this one the best out of the trilogy. I appreciated the more personal aspect of this collection, which is what I was missing from the second one, but I still felt like I was just kind of bored while reading it. I felt mostly distant from most of the poems featured in this, especially during the last chapter. This does feature a bunch of guest poems. I appreciate what Amanda Lovelace was trying to do with that, but I don't think it really fit into it because they're just all different styles of poetry and they were kind of all disjointed in that regard, so I wasn't a huge fan. Not that the individual poems were bad, but I just didn't feel like it fit into the collection. There were 2 that I really, really liked of all the poems in this book, and there's like a poem per page and it's like a 200-page book, so I feel like that says something. For the most part, I either felt like meh about most of the poems or I enjoyed them, but like from a distance. Like I didn't feel like they like hooked me in any way. Black Enough, Stories of Being Young and Black in America, edited by A.B. Zoboi and featuring a bunch of authors such as Justina Ireland, Danielle Clayton, and Renee Watson. This is an arc that I received from the publisher, and I gave this 4 stars. This is a collection of short stories by various authors, as I mentioned, about being Black in America. It's just a bunch of stories about Black kids living their Black kid life, and it was a good time. As with any anthology, there were stories that I liked more than others, but there weren't any stories that I specifically disliked. None of the stories were specifically amazing, but as a collection about Black teenagers just being Black and not being shot at or martyred, that was amazing enough for me. My favorites were the first one, Half a Moon by Renee Watson, and the one by Justina Ireland is about a lesbian Black girl or a girl who likes girls. I like that story. Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. This details the lives of a family with a white mom and a Chinese dad in the 70s after the middle daughter and the favorite child in the family is found dead in the lake behind their house. I gave this 3.5 stars. I enjoyed reading this, but it just didn't blow me away as much as everyone else did. On the one hand, I did think the book was interesting and the topics it explored were pretty interesting as well. Being a mixed race family in the 70s is definitely something worth exploring, and I think it did it interestingly. Everything about this book is interesting to me. I'm not sure if it did it well. It was definitely a take. On the other hand, I just wasn't as engaged in the story as I wanted to be. I felt like what the family was going through, I should have been more emotionally invested, and I wasn't, because it felt kind of clinical. It was just kind of a biography of everyone's lives, which I do enjoy reading, but it doesn't let me get really that close to anyone. For the most part, I was honestly kind of reading just to find out how the middle girl died. I wanted a for sure answer. It's kind of implied throughout the book, but I wanted to know for sure. The answer I got was kind of disappointing to me. Wasn't a big fan of the ending. I also hated the middle child. Her name was Lydia, and the 2 parents. I just didn't like being in their heads. I didn't like any of their justifications for their actions, which, I don't know, I do rate based on enjoyment, and every time they said things, I was really mad at them, so there's that. And I'm pretty sure the author didn't intend to make you dislike characters, and they were meant to be portrayed in more of a gray area, like people are good and bad, but in this situation, it just felt like they were kind of just bad. On the Come Up by Angie Thomas. This follows a girl named Bree, who's the daughter of an underground rap legend who unfortunately was shot and killed while Bree was still a young girl. But now she's 16 and has a dream of becoming a rapper in her own right without being known as the daughter of this rap legend. So we follow her as she's trying to make this dream come true, but also Bree's family is going through hard times. Her mom has just lost her job and they're having trouble keeping the lights on. And so Bree also feels more pressure to kind of make it big so she can help support her family. As you know, this is Angie Thomas's second book. Her first book was The Hate You Give. It was a movie, cultural phenomenon. And so a lot of people compare this to that. I won't be doing that. I gave this 4.5 stars. I really loved it. I think Angie Thomas just really has a way of capturing what it's like to be a teenager, specifically a Black teenage girl. And I'm here for it all the way through. I once again laughed, cried, teared up, felt a whole range of emotions while I was reading this. I enjoyed Brie as a character, but I didn't love a lot of the decisions she made, but I felt that they were realistic for how she was characterized, even though I was yelling at her through the book like I'm her mother, I guess. I don't know. But the fact that I cared about her so much to just like want the best for her, I think is another testament to Angie Thomas's writing. I really loved the side characters and Brie's relationships with them. You get to see her individual relationship with every member of her family, her friends, even a blossoming romance, which I thought was fun and added something to the story. I appreciated all the topics that were discussed in this book. There are some heavier topics. Brie does deal with police brutality again, not to the extent of The Hate U Give, but it's there. But I appreciated how, once again, Angie Thomas doesn't make it so that Brie isn't a one-dimensional character who only deals with the struggle TM, and she just has like a whole other aspects to her life. My last comment is that I'm not usually one for poetry or lyrics in books. To be honest, in most books I skip it because I just don't think it's done that well. But I started listening to this on audiobook and I heard the lyrics through that because honestly I probably just would have skipped it then too. And I was actually surprised that I enjoyed it. So when I switched to the physical copy, I kept reading them and I really enjoyed the actual like raps and rhymes and stuff in here. So I think that's something as well. And yeah, overall I love this. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari. This is a nonfiction book that deals with what the title says. It's a history of humankind, and it starts from before the agricultural revolution and talks about the various human species, and then it goes basically into present day and discusses how Homo sapiens, what we are, came to be the dominant species in the world and also the only species of humans left, and why the author thinks that it. As I expected, this was a super interesting read. This book kind of reminded me that I used to really like history in high school. I took one history class in college, which wasn't really history, but yeah, I used to actually really enjoy it. So this book kind of invigorated that for me. I did prefer the first half of the book just because I had almost no knowledge of any of the other species of humans and anything about humanity before the agricultural revolution. So I found that really fascinating and interesting. The second half of the book was also interesting, but it was also more opinion-based, I guess. But I thought it was interesting to hear his opinions about certain things, about why humanity does certain things. And yeah, overall, I thought it was an interesting book. It deserves the hype that it has gotten. China Rich Girlfriend by Kevin Kwan. This is the second book in the Crazy Rich Asians trilogy, and I gave it 3.5 stars. In this book, we continue to follow Nick and Rachel after the events of the first book, and we also follow a bunch of the other characters we're introduced to in the first book as well. I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm not going to say more than that. This was a fun read. I enjoyed reading it. However, I wanted to know more about Nick and Rachel, and for a lot of this book, we follow other characters who aren't them. Rachel was supposed to be the main character and she was like a secondary character or like a tertiary character, honestly, which I thought was a weird choice. Like I enjoyed it, but it just was weird. But I was also invested in the other characters that we got to see. To put it plainly, this just wasn't as good as the first one. It just didn't feel as tight. Like I said, the main characters felt more like tertiary characters, and it kind of just felt like a meandering story that didn't really have a way to go. But I enjoyed it. It was like reading a soap opera, which I enjoyed. But if you're not into that, then this might not be for you. The Bullet Journal Method by Ryder Carroll. This is what the title says. It's supposed to be a guide on how to bullet journal. I expected this to mostly be a technical guide, like just showing like, here's how you set up a spread, here's how you do this. But this also does feature some traditional self-help topics, which I wasn't a huge fan of. I felt like those parts were pretty boring and they dealt with the topics pretty shallowly. So I felt that it didn't quite fit the theme of just like telling you how to bullet journal, I guess. I say if you absolutely love bullet journaling, then there's no harm in reading this. I think if you're actually new to bullet journal, this might put you off more than it draws you in, because I feel like it's a little too like wooey, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's just like there's too much intention almost, where it might just feel like off-putting to even start. So I would actually recommend just using the videos online if you're new to bullet journaling. Tumbling by Caela Carter. We follow a diverse cast of 5 girls who are competing in the US Olympic trials for gymnastics. One of the girls is gay and in the closet, one of them is half Asian, and one of them is black, which is something that's kind of mentioned in the stories. So I thought I would put it out there. The author is white, and as far as I can find out, is not LGBTQIA+. So none of this representation is own voices, so just thought I'd put that out there. Since I can't speak to the Asian or lesbian representation, I won't. But for the Black representation of the Black girl, I didn't think it was done super poorly or anything, but something about her did seem a little off, not to the point where I didn't enjoy her character or didn't enjoy reading about it, but at times I felt like it was implied that the character was like treated unfairly because she was Black, but it wasn't explicitly stated, or like if you weren't thinking about that, I don't think you would have noticed. And I feel like the reason for that is just because it's not own voices, and the author didn't really want to go there, but she didn't want to ignore it either, so it just came off kind of weird. But other than that, I did really enjoy the story. I gave it 4.5 stars. I was completely invested in all of the characters, what was going on, the gymnastics, everything. I'm not a gymnastics super fan. I really only watch gymnastics every 4 years at the Olympics, and even then, I'm not tuning into every event or anything like that. So I'm not the person to ask if like the gymnastics representation was okay. I did read some reviews that said that some of the things that the author wrote in as possible were impossible or written wrong, like some of the flips that she wrote in were not correct. So if you are a gymnastics super fan and that would bother you, maybe don't read this. But I will say all the characters were unique and they all added something different to the story. I really enjoyed following their stories. I thought that they were well written and not just cookie cutter characters. I felt for everything that they were going through and the struggles that they were going through. Something about girls who are passionate about something and devote their lives, like really devote their lives to something, really draws me into a story. And for that reason, this kind of reminded me of Tiny Pretty Things, except about gymnastics, and you know how much I love Tiny Pretty Things, and if you don't, I have a whole video about it. All the characters in the whole book has a theme of really loving gymnastics and how that affects their individual lives, I guess. Yeah, just seeing how that affects them, and I loved that. And the last book that I read, I know this video was quite long, was The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is a book told in verse where we follow a girl who is 16, I want to say. She's dealing with her very overbearing religious mother as she is trying to figure out kind of her place in the world, having to do with like romance, how she feels about the church and God and everything, and dealing with growing into her body as a teenage girl. I listened to the audiobook, which as everyone says is amazing, and I agree. The author is a slam poet, and you can really tell in the audiobook as she reads the audiobook. And the main character, Xiomara, is writing poetry, and she wants to join a poetry club, but she doesn't want her parents to know because they would not support it. So I liked that kind of, not inception, but that like the poetry in here was really interesting and I liked it. I gave this 4.5 stars. I really appreciated Xiomara's struggle with her mother, just because like I think that's something that a lot of girls go through, especially if you have like immigrant parents like that. Yeah, just like super religious parents and you don't really fit. There is a thing about the dichotomy about how boys and girls are treated in families like this, and how Xiomara has a lot more pressure on her. Like she has to do all the chores and everything, and like her brother can help, but if he doesn't help, nothing happens. And it's just all the stress and pressure that she has to deal with. And I don't know, I just really enjoyed it. I felt for her at all times, and it just got me in the feels. Yeah, those are all the books that I've read in the month of March. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any opinions about any of the books that I mentioned in this video, please be sure to leave a comment down below. And also let me know what was your favorite book that you read in March. Mine was probably on the come up, but also The Poet X and Tumbling were pretty up there for me, but it's probably on the come up. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel because I make more videos where I talk about books, and hit the notification bell if you're so inclined. Follow me on my social media. I have Twitter and Goodreads. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in my next video. Bye!